essay is What We Take for Granted.
Thank you, Jennifer. Actually, I've decided not to read that particular piece. It occurred to me, fracking is an uplifting process, but not an uplifting topic for reading. So, and also it's a little bit too long. I realized this would be a long day. Many of us were at a very nice reading all afternoon and many other readings this evening, so I decided to read something briefer. I guess I wanted to start just by saying, isn't it wonderful to live in a place with so many eloquent, thoughtful, and funny people? So, thank you very much. So, I guess the reason I had thought earlier that I would read from the fracking book called Fracture, which just appeared, a rather thick anthology of poetry, fiction, and essays on fracking, is simply to call attention to this literary collection on a rather serious environmental topic that didn't just appear. And this is something I hadn't read before, the fracking piece. I just wrote it for this book. But instead, I thought I would read a brief piece from another anthology that just came out. It's a book called Forest Understory, Creative Inquiry in an Old-Growth Forest. This is a piece that I wrote a number of years ago when I was a writer-in-residence at the Andrews Experimental Forest in the Oregon Cascades. The Andrews Forest, or the Experimental Forest, is a research station operated by the National Science Foundation and Oregon State University. And when I was a resident there in 2004, I was one of the first people of the literary ilk who'd been invited to spend time in a place that had been devoted to scientific research. In 1980, when the Andrews Experimental Forest was established, it was determined that the National Science Foundation would begin a 200-year LTER, long-term ecological research project. 200 years, obviously, well beyond the lifespan of the individual researchers. And the idea was that this kind of extended longitudinal research would yield discoveries that couldn't occur in a much briefer time span. But the wise people at the Spring Creek Project for Nature Ideas and the Written Word, particularly people like Kathleen Dean Moore and Charles Goodrich, realized that the letter R, could represent something other than research, as in empirical quantitative research, and they developed the Long-Term Ecological Reflections Project. So Kathy Moore had spent time there, a few other writers, and then they contacted me and asked if I would be willing to spend a week there in the woods by myself, reflecting. And reflecting, it sounds like a generous thing to invite someone to reflect and to be there, but when someone commands you to reflect, it's challenging. And I spent a few days just trying to figure out what it meant to really read the book of nature, as Debbie Lee said, not to get my head out of words and texts and to start paying attention to the environment around me. And in fact, one of the first things I did when I arrived at this research station was remove my watch. I'm someone who operates very much by the clock and sort of a linear thinker in many ways. And I removed my watch and I began working on an essay that I called Out of Time. What does it mean to step out of time? I was immersed, I was playing a very small role in a 200-year project of reflection and research, and I knew that whatever I wrote would be archived along with all of the scientific material. And so I wrote this essay called Out of Time, mostly about wandering by myself deep in the primeval old-growth forest, and also visiting the clear cuts that are part of the Andrews Forest. They're studying the impacts of various logging practices. So I stared at a lot of clear cuts. I wandered in the deep green, dense forests. I was not wearing a watch. I would just disappear for the day in these places. And this short section that was excerpted in the book Forest Understory that just came out is about visiting a gravel bar, just an area of stones and of geological interest, very close to the actual research station. And it's they included it in a section of the book on change and continuity. So much of it has to do with time and change and just looking closely at the world. It's a very short piece, that's why I gave such a long preamble. So this is from Out of Time. Today, after I've spent several days visiting the gravel bar next to Lookout Creek and looking at it from different angles, I noticed the solidity of the stones, mud, logs, and tangle of alders, firs, and hemlock feels startlingly contradictory to the actual newness of this landscape in the context of geological time. This gravel bar is an infant, yet to me it feels permanent. At the same time, there's a vibrant sense of upheaval here, as if the entire sweep of water, hillsides, and trees is a sort of waterfall, frozen in form during the brief moment when I'm here to witness it. My friend John Felstener is fond of describing waterfalls as flux taking form. He's referring to the paradoxical dynamic in Western nature poetry of the past 2 centuries and in nature itself, by which raw energy can show design. The gravel bar also strikes me as flux taking form, as I can see the future of this place written in the not flooding creek and in the many tilting trees, pausing now en route back to the earth. Just because we don't see actual change, our eyes being as temporary as the rest of our being, doesn't mean change isn't happening right before our eyes. This gravel bar, it occurs to me, is a rare clearing in the forest, a viewpoint, strangely like a clear cut, but without the debris of tree limbs and the steepness, the stumpage, and with many more rocks, mossy with new life. A kingfisher zips past as I sit on my wet boulder, following the flow of the creek. An airplane groans overhead, unseen above the clouds, its sound competing with the rush of water. And then there is only the water. Thank you.